This is fun.
now we're recording. Great. Okay, perfect.
Now we're recording.
And as typical, we always talk about something that has nothing to do with anything that we
That's our shtick.
actually have to talk about.
Yeah.
Yes. But people have already heard me sing that song too many times, so it's good that it wasn't recorded. We're back in my office. We've been moving around a little bit lately between virtual guests and...
You know who we had on yesterday? Do you guys know Voulay?
No.
That's a familiar...
Nonprofit
AF.
Yeah.
From Seattle.
Seattle.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
Yeah, he's like a famous guy.
He's a major...
Twitter famous.
LinkedIn famous.
He's actually TikTok famous.
TikTok famous.
Because he did,
That's much better.
Nonprofit math.
Yeah,
and that got a lot of views. But I was going to say, you guys are, Maria and Nate, you are lucky number episode 13.
And our first double guest. We've only done a single guest.
Double guest.
So you guys are in together. So you guys are pioneering.
And 13 is my lucky number.
I love the number 13.
Yes, I
You'll
do
experience our natural rapport.
Yeah, well, get him right in the fold. Yes.
That's right. So this is The Ripple Effect. Welcome, everybody. My name is Ron Waddell. I am the co-founder and executive director of Legendary Legacies. And Marybeth Campbell is a co-host. And what do you do, Marybeth?
Oh, no. So today was fire drills.
Running around?
A bad debacle fire drills. We got a strong C+ on that one today. But that's why we practice. But I'm the CEO of Worcester Community Action Council. And I've been here for we're approaching 5 years at this point.
That's right. And super happy to have with us Maria. How do you want to introduce yourselves? And are you representing? Because you guys have multiple hats, but today.
Good morning, everybody. So glad to be here. Maria Fernandes-Dominique, board member of CPA Mass, community leader, mom of a delicious Black boy, and a adopted daughter of Worcester, Massachusetts.
Yes.
Come on.
Officially adopted. And your son is 5 or 6?
My son is 6. Going on 60.
Yeah. Old soul. He's got old soul. Yes. Yeah.
And a salesman.
And a salesman.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a good combo.
We were reading a book, the Barack Obama book, to his daughters. And when we get to the page where he saw Martin Luther King, he's like, "Hey, my guy." Should I be proud that you know Martin Luther King, or should I be ashamed that you have no home training?
First name basis.
We do not.
That's his
Marty,
what's up? That's his boy.
We do not call him my guy.
It's a different, that I have sons who are 10 and 11 and I'm getting adjusted. Mario's adjusted. It's a Marybeth's face.
Well, I mean, no,
I can push back.
Like I've often said, I have a face for radio, so no one needs to see me per se,
but a voice for Diddy.
Yes.
But a voice for Diddy.
Yeah.
Yes.
And they said to me the other day, which makes me feel really old. We were fixing something on my phone. And they said, "You don't know how to do that because you were born in the 1900s." And immediately I was like, "No."
Yeah.
Wait, I was. Because 1900 for me, I went to like 1906.
Yes.
Or 1981.
It covers some ground.
Yeah.
And
like,
it is true.
I wasn't realizing, but they were born in 2012. So
I had a similar experience last night. I went to Shaw's. I just picked up a couple of things and, it's high school kids checking me out. Not checking me out, like out of the cash
or
register.
checking you, like, yeah.
Like,
no pun intended.
No. But he was like, "Can I have your ID, ma'am?" And because I was buying Theraflu for Adriana, she's sick, and I was like, Theraflu might be helpful. And he said, "Ma'am," and I was like, "Ma'am," and he was like, "Yes." And he's like, "I need your ID because you're buying." And I was like, "Well, you just called me ma'am, so why do you need my ID?"
Both of these things
and
cannot
he's
be
like,
true.
"I have to. Yeah, these things cannot be true at the same time." So he's like, "I have to scan it so he looks at it and he's like, 1978," and I was like, "You're making it worse, young man." Young man.
Yes.
I would appreciate the way you read that number.
He's like, "What do you want me to call you?" And I was like, "I don't anything but ma'am, please."
And Maria, next to you is...
Yeah, Nathan Davis Hunt. And if ma'am rolls off my lips, that's because I grew up in rural Texas.
Okay.
It's just in there at some like elemental level. So I apologize in advance.
Okay.
I'm still working my way out of it as an adopted Massachusetts.
I totally agree. Yesterday I had a dental cleaning and my hygienist was from Texas. And I could immediately tell as soon as I came in, "How are you, sir?" "Yes, sir."
Right.
Is this your first? "No, sir." And everything. And then when I go to the Mass College of Pharmacy, and I absolutely go. I love working with the students there and just getting to know them. And it's cost less too.
Yeah.
So, and then when the teacher comes over, same thing. so you're going to do this now and do that? Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Like everything, it was so
polite,
fascinating.
but in a way where you're not quite sure if you should trust them or not. I am Nathan Davis Hunt. I'm the founding director of the Community Purchasing Alliance of Massachusetts. That's my primary hat I'm going to rock today. I'm a writer. I'm a seminary graduate like yourself over there. And pleased to be in your company.
This is so cool to be here and have you guys on the show. Also, I think we need to make full disclosure that the three of us are also on the Greater Worcester Community Foundation Board, DEIB subcommittee.
Yes.
So we just put that out there.
Yes.
But we've known Maria for some time.
Yes. Yeah, in different ways. I've been in your workshops and
Thank you for
learning from you. Yeah.
It's dope people. That's what we have on here.
We only invite the coolest of peoples.
So the way that we usually kick things off is, you've already mentioned some of it, Nathan. So we're going to do this with both of you. So you have to give each other time. I don't know why I'm whispering. I don't know why I went to that voice.
You're doing that. You do that sometimes. You go to
got all right back with smooth jazz. It's because why do I do? I just phased into it.
Want a voice for radio. Yes.
Just wanted to talk. I do that. Yeah. Let me get out of there. Now that register's stuck in my head and I keep wanting to find it. No, but your origin story, what got you? We'll get to CPA in a second, but what even got you guys into doing this work? Some of the things that we talked about with others, specifically familial values, kind of upbringing, put you in the space of wanting to help, wanting to support community, those kind of things. But from where you see it, how did you get here? And we'll do reverse. We'll go Nathan first.
Okay.
All right. So let's dive into the deep end. So I grew up in rural Texas. And as you can imagine, I didn't grow up in a place where they were doing this kind of work that we talk about on a podcast like this. I grew up in a place that is plantation country, right? That evolved into prison plantations and convict labor. And when I was a kid, my dad would take a shortcut across a red dirt road on the other side of the Brazos River to get to my preschool. And I could look out the window and I could see black men with hoes and matching uniforms working in cotton fields in the prison farm that we were cutting across. And that farm has recently been turned into subdivisions. They're just building houses there like crazy. That's the new cash crop of our era. And they were digging out there not long ago, and construction ground to a halt when some bones came up out of the ground. And it turned into an archaeological dig, and the unmarked graves of 95 convict laborers that had just been thrown under the dirt. That's where I come from.
Wow.
And I come from a place where that history is swept under the dirt, right? Literally and figuratively. And the question I've been asking increasingly as my journey, and I won't get into all of, the space in between, is how do we get from that plantation economy to a solidarity economy? Or, to use a kind of theological language, I don't know how far we go into that with our audience here, but, how do we move towards, from domination to communion,
right,
in our economy, right? How do we move towards that kind of justice and peace and relationship, and out of those old kind of ways of building structures and relationships and white supremacy that is woven through everything? What is the path to transformation? How do we resist the old, and how do we build the new? And how do we become the kind of people who are capable of being in those new kinds of relationships? So I've been on a journey through a bunch of different stuff, from more direct services to community economic development work, affordable housing work. I got into community organizing and passing legislation of all kinds. But I was pretty captivated along the way by this vision of cooperatives as a way to bring ownership of the economy and back into the community, build wealth back in communities, democratize those kind of things, bring that kind of decision making instead of just those with money making the calls and getting the benefits of what's happening in our economy. So that's been something that's inspired me, and I've been a part of in a variety of ways. And this is a bit kind of leading into the origin story of the Community Purchasing Alliance, but coming out of really grassroots community organizing happening here, folks were saying two things. One, it's really expensive to run our organizations And it also turns out we're all spending money on the same stuff, but my CFO or my ops director or facilities director, we're not really talking with each other. We're not collaborating. We're not sharing best practices. So what if we got together around that kind of thing and we built a cooperative that could help serve all of us? But also, we started building this at the end of 2020. What does it mean to actually see our budgets and our expenses and the contracts we're using as community organizations as tools and as something that needs to respond to the racial reckoning that we're coming to as a community? And so how do we think about reinvesting that money back in the community in some creative ways to close the racial wealth gap? So,
which is quite wide in Boston.
Quite wide in Boston.
Everywhere but
beyond.
Boston.
And Boston in particular is horrendous. And so that's what we've been trying to be about. Like, how do we build the opposite of a plantation right now? And so we're trying to weave that together in some creative ways.
We're going to get back to that because there's going to be some great conversation around a lot of things you said there. But Maria, please, your origin story. How did you get here? How did you become a board member? How do you know Nate? Why are we talking today? What are we doing?
Yes, thank you. What a great question. And I just want to appreciate you for everything you've said. I've heard Nathan's origin story many times, but that was just so powerful. And I just want to appreciate you for telling it in that way. I am from an island nation off the west coast of Africa, Cape Verde. My people are classified as the first free Blacks to be in the United States. We came here through the whaling industry, where men would come from Cape Verde to, Pawtucket and, Cape Cod and New Bedford and Fall River, and they would engage in the whaling industry. So that's how my people came here. I grew up in a gateway city, Brockton, Massachusetts, the city of champions.
Yeah.
Yes. Former shoe capital of the world.
That's the shoe capital?
Oh my God.
Was.
A fact I was not aware of as a shoer.
Yeah. Yes. So there were all these shoe factories in Brockton at one time. And my mother, may she rest in peace and power.
A pump feels like a sneaker.
Yeah. Going back to, she actually worked for Titleist and FootJoy, which is a major golf apparel company, right?
Yes.
So she actually, her trade was making shoes.
Wow.
And so when she came to the United States, didn't have a formal education, but was able to work in this factory and learn the trade. So that's that story. Cool. From one gateway city to another, I came to Worcester, to Clark University for my education. And it was the first time that my eyes opened up to community organizing. I remember coming for orientation, and I remember this white girl who had dreads, and she was in the middle of the quad protesting police brutality. And I was like, who is this woman? What are they doing here? And I was like, I have to come to this school. And I did. And that's where my love for public policy, legislation, community organizing, that's where it happened. I was groomed here in this city. So I just have so much appreciation for the city. Went off to Boston after undergrad and worked on Beacon Hill for a very long time, underpaid. It was not the Beacon.
There. I get it.
It was not the Beacon Hill that it is today. It was, majority white legislators, and I was one of a few lobbyists of color. And it was not an easy place to work at, but I did that work for a very long time, and then got into the affordable housing space and was introduced to the concept of cooperatives and loved it. I worked with a regional organization called CDI, Cooperative Development Institute, and they did regional work. And from there, just opened up my eyes to this new economy, solidarity economy model. And CPA came to Massachusetts through the Greater Boston Interfaith Organization, which I was a member of. And they said, we have this opportunity to work in a cooperative model. And I said, sign me up. I want to do this. So 3 years later, here I am, a member of the board and someone who is so excited about this organization and this work. And that's it, y'all.
That's awesome. I think for our audience that may not know what a co-op and the co-op model is, can you tell us a little bit about the core principles and what are the sort of mechanics of it?
I'll let Nathan answer that, and I'll add to whatever he misses.
Right, fill in the gaps. So businesses tend to be structured around who owns them. Traditionally, you either have a small business that's being founded by an individual. With big corporations, you've got a board of directors. If the business is profitable, that board gets the profits. Maybe workers do, maybe they don't. They don't have any rights to that. You've got public corporations, you've got, shareholders, but there's a real division between who has brought money into a business and who's just working in that business. You've got another division between who are the consumers buying the products from that business and the business itself, right? So cooperatives think about ways to break down some of those boundaries. So the more stakeholders are included at the table in decision-making and in the benefits of what the business is doing. So in our case, we are owned by some of the organizations that purchase with us. So our consumers are our owners. They elect the board, they represent, they help us make decisions. And if we turn a profit, which we don't really try to do because we're actually oriented around saving them money, not trying, kind of a contradiction there, that would go back as a dividend to them. So most people are familiar with REI, the big outdoors equipment. That's a co-op. Anybody can go in there and buy a pair of shoes to stay on that theme. And that's great. Anybody can shop there. But a lot of us, we pay our $20 and we're members of REI. And based on how much we've purchased in that year, we might get 10% back at the end of the year. So that's a pretty unique business model. They're a big corporate version of it. We're a much more grassroots version of that. So there's actually different legal statutes. We're not a 501c3 nonprofit. We're not a C Corp. In Massachusetts, you can actually incorporate businesses as cooperatives.
Yep.
And that means that we don't have to only think about maximizing profit. And that means that our governance includes the people who own us. It also includes workers at the table. We have one worker seat on our board of directors. And so there's worker power inside of many cooperatives. So there are a number of different types of co-ops, and I can circle back to that as well. And it means that if we're profitable, the benefits of that get shared with the whole community. So it's really a strategy for community wealth, as well as it's often historically been a way to solve for market challenges. So a lot of people in New England are going to be familiar with like ocean spray, right? So all the
Middlebury.
All the cranberry farmers get together and they say, man, it's really hard to get my cranberries to market. What if we formed a co-op? It's called a producer co-op, and they can help market and sell that and deliver it. So that's one way that people can get together to solve a problem. There's worker-owned cooperatives here in Worcester. Works Printing is a worker-owned print shop that does incredible work. They do...
I wasn't familiar.
Me either, but we were just talking about printing.
Locked in.
Shout out to Works, because they're doing printing for Maura Healey's campaign, for AOC. They're doing a lot of political stuff, but also our swag is printed by them. We've got some gorgeous bags and stuff, but the workers own that business as a collective. And that's a really powerful solution to worker rights in the workplace, workers being able to build wealth and have more say over their benefits and policies around the workplace, all those kind of things. Yeah. So that's co-ops.
And another example of a co-op that I'd like to give, REI, I think is one we all know, but when I was with CDI, Cooperative Development Institute, we would work with manufactured home communities, or what people incorrectly or inappropriately term trailer parks. Mm-hmm. That's not what they're called. Manufactured homes. They're actually manufactured homes. And there's people that live in this community, but they don't own the land that their manufactured homes are on. So anytime the landowner wants to sell the land, they got to move.
Like a land trust?
Well, it's not a land trust. So they, CDI helped them to actually buy the land from the owner, and then they become owners and occupiers of the land. And then they put together a sort of like a board, right? And then they manage everything on the land, from the electricity to the snow removal, whatever the case may be. And so that's just another example of the grassroots cooperative model.
So these sound great. I mean, the way you guys painted them is like, why don't we all go to them?
We should.
And so we were just talking with Vule yesterday about this, and he said something that was profound in connecting to this conversation. He said there are these certain prescribed rules that we all just
are conditioned to accept.
Accept because they're there.
Right.
Marybeth had asked about, like, she made a comment about, I have 21 bosses on my board, right? Flippantly. But then, like, for him, he was like, well, wait. Even though, like, you say that, there's a conditioning there about how you think about things.
Mm-hmm.
And so what you guys are trying to do, I feel, and what co-ops are doing, is really saying there's a whole different way to think about this. But the way it is right now works for so many people, right? Like it's working for some people. So why should they change that? Why should I? This is working for some people. So the push of CPA, I'm on your side, but like, what's the? How do you convince that this is a viable model? Because even when I think about co-ops, in my atmosphere as I hear about them, as I've learned about them and hear you talk about them so much more. But like on the surface of people, it's like, don't take this wrong, anyone, but it's like 4-year college and community college. It's like, it's not real college, right? It's like you went and got a degree you got an associate's. And so in some way I feel like the way that folks think of co-ops, or at least me, I'll own that, and the conversations I've had around are like, they don't really work. It's cool, but once they get to a certain size, they don't really work. And so I'd love for you guys to interact with that conversation, and like, because I love what you guys are doing, and I want you guys to talk about what CPA does too, and how it supports and helps. But I also want for our listeners, like, why aren't there more co-ops based on like what we just described? Like, how come is that part of a systemic structure that keeps that conversation from getting out there? I don't know, but why aren't there more or well known?
Do you want to start on this?
Yeah, I think firstly, talking about how we're conditioned and sort of our default is this capitalistic society that we live in, right? Like in the United States, it's all about you as the individual, your family, your needs, and your wealth building, right? We're not taught to think about the community and solidarity and equity. We're just not taught that way, right? Like, and so I think on a very high level, we are conditioned to tend to self first. And so a cooperative model is not about the self, it's about the community, right? And it's about the collective. So that's firstly. And then I also think coming out of this very capitalistic system is this scarcity mentality. There just can't be, as you said, when it gets too big, right? So if it gets this big, there can't possibly be enough to go around, right? And that's just not the case. We have seen, especially during COVID, we saw when we cater and we to the needs of those who are underrepresented, that we can solve everybody else's problem, right? So we don't have to have that mentality, but we're conditioned to have that mentality. So I'll just say that. And Nathan, anything to add?
Yeah, I could go off on this. So
please
stop me if I go too long. First of all, about 1/3 of people in the world are members of a cooperative.
Wow.
It is an enormous part of the global economy. And a lot of people aren't aware of that. Most municipalities are part of a cooperative because they do purchasing together.
Yeah.
Organizations all over the place, groceries, they do group purchasing through cooperatives. We've already talked about a huge portion of the agricultural sector, from Ocean Spray to your favorite cheese and dairy company. These are...
They dropping that science.
They are cooperatives, right? It is an enormous part of the American economy also. This is not just something overseas.
And the NFL.
Woo! Come on.
NBA on NBC.
I think it was hype music for what I was about to say. Like, build the momentum.
Hey, we were excited for that, for sure.
Okay, so first of all, it already is at scale in so many different areas, right? It already is. We just don't acknowledge it. We don't see it. I think the other piece is when it comes to like the resilience of these, the success of startup businesses. And I wish I'd printed off a fact sheet if I knew you were going to ask me this question. You probably did tell me you were going to ask it. I was traveling yesterday to take care of my sick parents, so that's my excuse.
Understood.
Apologies.
Forgiven.
Fact checkers. But,
right. They're real.
The success rate of a cooperative making it as an entrepreneurial endeavor versus the average startup business is statistically meaningfully higher.
Is that right? Wow.
Also, in terms of economic downturns, cooperatives, because you have a collective of people who are all invested in this, not just as workers, but as owners of the business, where they're making their own wealth and where they've wanted to build their own future, those businesses ride through a economic downturns much better, as well as in the housing sector. There's incredible data around cooperative land and as well as community land trusts, or their ability to move through foreclosure crises and things like that. So why aren't there more? I think there's a few structural reasons for that, and then a few more cultural reasons. So first of all, starting a business is hard, and you need capital.
For sure.
So up until, well, I don't know if it's passed yet, the SBA, which manages loans to small businesses, did not allow cooperatives to receive loans from the SBA because they didn't have an individual whose credit they could look at in the same way as
it's
the traditional businesses.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. So there was a huge segment of startup capital that was not available to us. Also, most banks don't want to make loans to cooperatives because they don't know how to appraise them in the same way, and they don't know how to make their money back. And so the traditional finance sector has not made capital available, and that is the key to every startup business, right?
Yeah.
The other thing has been from the policy side of things. There's not been public supports, tax credits, all these things that make it easier for some businesses to start up. And I've been part of multiple startup businesses. I'm not saying it's easy to start any business. Like we just said, a ton go under, but there are not the same kind of technical assistances and capacity supports. So that's another huge piece. Many states don't even have what Massachusetts has, which is a statute to be able to incorporate as a cooperative. And then I think there's these cultural elements where we think, well, at the end of the day, somebody has got to be in charge, right? Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, somebody's got to be in charge. And I'm not going to say
one single person, not a
that
group
goes
of people.
back to the P word that I said earlier.
Yep.
Y'all know what I'm talking about?
Oh, yeah.
But we are enculturated to believe that somebody has to have power and somebody's got to be the owner, right? To make the decisions around here. Not that everybody can be part of that decision-making process, and that there's actually so many tools and strategies for democratically managing organizations. So I think that's a huge piece. You know, another thing that's big in the co-op world right now is there's the silver tsunami. There's all these boomers who are retiring. They've got small businesses. They would love to hand it off. They don't want to see their legacy go nowhere. My dad had a very small business that he built over the course of 40 years, allowed us to come into the middle class and be, solid. He tried to sell that later in this year. He was able to. The guy ran into the dirt 3 years later, and all of his workers were laid off. And that breaks my dad's heart. Yeah. And I explained to him, you could have sold this business to your workers. They know how to run your business. And he's like, if that had just been, if anyone had been sharing right? But it's not at your local small business center that they're saying, one of the strategies you should consider for starting your business or transitioning your business is a cooperative, right? So it's not disseminated in that same way, but there's been periods of history. A lot of people may also be thinking, isn't that one of those hippie things, right? Like, that's like a white people thing where they start their grocery and it's still too expensive and that's co-ops, right?
Biodiesel from
exactly. That's a thing. No knock on them, right? Like shout out, Massachusetts has an incredible network of food co-ops all up and down the state, and those are critical resources in many communities, but. Y'all look up Jessica Nimhard Gordon's work on the history of Black cooperatives as a strategy for when people are shut out of the mainstream economy, how from Reconstruction into Jim Crow, into every phase, they've been setting up their own credit unions, their own consumer co-ops, their own worker-owned businesses, their own insurance, right? A lot of mutuals, right? Liberty Mutual. A lot of these things got started as cooperatives and then they go corporate over time, right? Yeah. So I think it is in many ways an information problem, a political problem, a finance problem, and just a believing that actually if we sit down together and we have some good structures for how to do it, we can make good decisions and we can run something really effectively that actually serves our community better and builds wealth for all of us.
Yes.
Two questions, different pieces of this, but one of the things that Ron and I have talked about in terms of as nonprofits, and I run a larger nonprofit in the city. It's not huge, but it's a larger as compared to...
It's huge to me.
To you. Right, that's the
I was walking through here and it seemed like
this piece of this office is actually, we're out of space. It's very bizarre, but we took, anyway.
Maybe that's humble.
One of the origins of our partnership is that this agency, prior to my leadership, benefited from some blind trust and got a grant because there was a relationship with the city and the grant landed here, right? So we have the the power dynamic as historically white only led organization and female led organization. There was trust given there without necessarily the corollary full expertise in the work. And as a result, LL in that same parallel time didn't get the grant, right? To be the lead. And so we've shifted this relationship because of Ron and I's personalities and relationship and decisions. But I, as the head of WCAC here, I feel very compelled, one, to be acknowledging of that, but also really think and have conversations with our board about what our role is in that, either to get out of the way or be part of a different process of how we're elevating and working more with smaller organizations that tend to be more BIPOC led. You've mentioned Ocean Spray. You just mentioned Liberty Mutual, REI, that are now much larger, capital privileged in intensity businesses. Is there a role for those corporations to also be creating capital opportunities for building more cooperatives?
That's a great question.
That is a great question.
Is there a role for those type of corporations?
Because in the atmosphere and system where the financial system hasn't been able to figure out how to get away from the simplicity of dealing with one person, right? Or what they might perceive the ease of that to be and the power of that. In the absence of that, in the way I'm thinking is like, can we as a large nonprofit play a better role and be a better partner and be better in the community, but also like in that parallel, those larger that started as co-ops, right?
Yeah.
So are they playing a role? And is there a role there for the access to capital and that support?
I think there absolutely could be. More often than not, there's a founder group that is more ideologically committed. And over time, you have to maintain a bottom line and you have to grow your business and make decisions, and different leaders come in and some of that culture is lost. And so I think one of the questions is structurally, how do you maintain those kind of cultures? How do you write that into your bylaws and your governance structures, right? How do you write the DNA of an institution, corporation, or whatever it is that kind of keeps you on mission in a certain way? There's a lot of great thinking happening about that. That's something we've put a lot of thought into as we wrote our own bylaws. How do we build mission and shared power into this? Kind of tying in with what you were just naming about the way that a funder came in, or even back to the earlier question around, isn't the way things are currently working for most people? Money has power, right? Everywhere. Money has power everywhere. And part of what co-ops are trying to do is decouple this assumption that we have, one of these things that we just all take for granted, that whoever brought the money to the table is the one who should have the loudest voice.
Yeah.
And so I think, there's various foundations who are thinking really creatively about that, and probably have some models that corporations could take into consideration, where committees of grassroots folks are actually making decisions around where funding is going. That's something any corporate philanthropy office could take on. I think part of, if I can talk a little bit about our model, we're pulling community organizations together into the same purchasing group. So we have nonprofits with $100,000 budgets and 7-8 figure budgets that are all coming together and saying, hey, turns out you have an electricity bill.
Yeah.
I have an electricity bill. What if we try to go out and negotiate together for a better rate? And what happens when the big folks come in to the same group in solidarity at the actual point of negotiating business, versus this kind of like sidearm philanthropy stuff, but actually where they do their business transactions, is that you can have solidarity within that transaction decision-making. We're both putting our money into the same pot. Now that's real. That's going from like, dating to like, we're moving in together.
Yeah, this
like,
is courting at this point. Yeah.
Like we got to share bank accounts now.
Yeah.
So, we saw back in 2021 when we did our first group electricity purchase, there was a small Black church in Cambridge that was doing a anti-racism book club with one of the biggest white synagogues in the greater Boston area. And they said, hey, we're talking with the Community Purchasing Alliance about exploring this electricity purchase through them because we're spending a lot of money on that. We're having trouble keeping our lights on at the end of the day. Why don't you bring your purchasing power into the same group and actually put your money where your mouth is? Let's do racial equity right here.
Boom.
Boom, right? Then it's concrete. It's not just...
It's not theoretical.
It's not just liberals talking about stuff and trying to, let's get the same good ideas. It's actual, let's do some concrete action together around our money.
Yeah.
And now they both get the same rate on their utility bill every month. It's better than either of them could have gotten on their own, but there's equity there's equality inside of that group, right? So that's some real power. And I think there's enormous opportunity for these kind of corporations to think in those same terms. I mean, the other side of that coin, right? There's equity that happens inside of that, but there's also, where's that dollar going to? Mm-hmm. What's the wage that the workers are earning who are winning this contract? Not just the business owner, but their actual workers. Is that a worker-owned business? Could we contract with a janitorial company that is owned by a group of Guatemalan women out of East Boston who've started their own cleaning company and help them build wealth right now while we get our needs met, and we can do so at a really reasonable cost to us? How do we tie all that together?
I love what you're talking about there, because one of the things I remember coming out of the pandemic, I was on a panel and they were talking about I think it was for the Chamber of Commerce or something I was on, but they were talking about innovation during the pandemic, right? And they were asking the panel around how do they feel moving forward? What's the future of nonprofits, right? Like, it's a crystal ball, we're going to figure it out. But one of the things that we've done at Legendary, which ties into some ways what you're talking about, is I feel you have to be multi-mission focused, but solve multiple issues. Mm-hmm. Right? So we're helping returning citizens. That's what we do. We come to find out that food insecurity is an issue. So we know that they need employment. And working with the Worcester Worcester County Food Bank, we've designed a transitional employment program where they're the labor force to deliver food to pantries. And so these men are getting the employment, they're getting the soft skills training, learning it, not didactically, right? I think information and skill are two different things. You get skill by doing. And so they're doing that while also recognizing the impact they're having on their community. And so what drives a lot of that for me, and I think not just for all of us, is in this is thinking about how do we stay mission focused, but use our mission to solve multiple issues. Yeah. And that's kind of what I'm hearing with the Community Purchasing Alliance. It's not just, hey, I'm going to help solve or help you reduce some of your rates here. There's also then let's bring in this other cooperative or this other owner group to help multiply this and provide wealth for immigrant like in their families. And then there's at the risk of a shameless plug, there's a ripple effect.
That's right. If I can piggyback on that, and I'm sorry if I'm
no, go ahead.
Cut me off. I relate to that story so much. One of my experiences is about 10 years ago. I was living in Fresno, California, and there's about 45% unemployment in some of the downtown neighborhoods that are, largely Black and brown. A lot of returning citizens coming back, as well as folks with gang backgrounds in that city, and all kinds of barriers to employment, right? And I was working with a church CDC kind of thing at that time, and we started this small business we called Say Hello Advertising, and it was a door-to-door flyer delivery business. It's like there's very little soft skills. Like you can get out and do a job and make some money today, and that was our social enterprise strategy for primarily returning citizens and trying to create. And then we had some various coaching things we were doing. And it was in that time that I started studying co-ops, because two things, as well as the policy side, right? So how do our institutions get better? But also we need a structural reality that is solving for this. Because it just was killing me that, this is a good job, an okay job, for a few years, but then these folks are going back out to try to find a job. So we did two things. One is we started going up to the State House and trying to get them to ban the box, so that there was not
a requirement to fill that. Yeah,
exactly. So if you had a felony on your background, you have to check this box, then your resume just goes in the trash.
Absolutely.
Right. So one of the returning citizens was part of this amazing group of folks with a history of incarceration that was organizing around that, and he brought me along. That was my first experience of lobbying at a state capitol. It was just coming along with a bunch of guys. I was like, this is wild. And I think maybe they're going to listen to us. And they have since then. Not because of me. I left that state eventually. But so partially, we got to change policy. We got this whole structural reality. But also, all these other businesses are not places where these folks can not only get employment, but actually have power and agency inside of their workplace. We still have an economy that has these two tiers. You got workers who can come in and do their task and hopefully rise up inside of that system. But what if Say Hello Advertising had been owned by these folks? They could have been the worker owners of our business, as well as just folks who are getting a job and some training. What if there were other worker-owned businesses and cooperatives that they could have moved on to, where they could actually have power and agency and dignity and build wealth beyond just their paycheck? And that's critical, right? And so it was exactly around that kind of challenge where I started getting exposed to this strategy.
What you both just said, it reminds me of recent conversations that we've had with Natanya and Vu, respectively, about at the end of the day, in Vu's example of transitioning from being a completely community represented board of people that were from the community they had the power of the decision making, and then at some point he transitioned his board into a more traditional board, and it went very awry in his description.
Yep.
And then Natanya also talking about rather than in philanthropy, just focusing on what the shiny object is at the time, whether it's healthy neighborhoods or arts and culture, or workforce, or whatever it is that if you center on people, then you don't have that. Your mission drift dissipates a little bit because you're centering on people, not on the shiny thing.
Yeah.
And in that piece, in terms of where your co-ops are helping to democratize, right, and put power at the center of the people, owning it and making the decisions. What's the process like? There's not always agreement at the same table.
Oh man.
Because people are humans.
Couples can't agree to where to eat. You know what I mean? What do you want to eat? What do you want to get? I don't know. What do you want to?
Oh my God. You start on this one.
He said, you take this one. I'm going to take a break.
People are going to continue to be people. People are going to people. I don't know that we have, a silver bullet for how we sort of recommend that people engage in cooperatives, but I do know a lot of cooperatives don't have the same structure. Because they don't have the same structure as, traditional businesses, the way of there's actually like principles around how we make decisions, right? It's not one person says it and then we do it. It's we all say what we're going to do and then we do it, right? And that process, Nathan, you know better than me, but it's lengthy, it's intentional, and some people don't like it and don't want to go through it, but that's the process that is the most democratic for any cooperative. So I say other than that, I mean, people are just, and also, as you said, I feel like in the cooperative space, people lead with relationship building. So it's not, it's about understanding who people are, meeting them where they're at, and working from there. Right. Yeah.
I was reading a report, because I'd be nerding out on my own. But I was reading a report actually it was released in 2000, I think. It was from BYU. But the title, and we have fact checkers, we have to put this in the show notes. I'll get it right in the show notes. You put a marker. But It was the study was basically social connectedness as a public health priority. And the statistics from this were phenomenal.
Like social capital, you mean? Like
no. I'm talking about healthy relationship and social connectedness,
Gotcha.
and the ability when you are disconnected, right? What they found in the study, it was a large meta analysis they did, but what came out of it was the ability to be social connected had impacts on your mortality, even if you had adverse things going on in your life, such as smoking, obesity. If you had those who were isolated, who did not have healthy social relationship and connections, will die quicker than those who don't. Why am I bringing this up? Well, because I think that even in our relationship on an individual level, and this conversation about what you're talking about in co-ops, relationships really are strengthened in the crucible. You have to go through difficult stuff together. And if you come out on the other side of that and you do it well and healthy, you will only intensify the social connectedness. If you don't persevere through healthy tension and you keep those things to yourself and we just say, hey, we're going to go forward with this because that's what someone said, and I don't work through my stuff, there's going to be some resentment in there that exists potentially. And then down the line, even though that's short-term victory, I think that it can have deleterious effects on the community. So why am I bringing it up? So what values drive the co-op? Because there are certain values in business which are the bottom line, right? And so we've got to get money. That's the value in a lot of for-profit entities. Even in some nonprofits, I got to get money, right, to do what I need to do. And so we have a set of values, and organizations have values. So to what level do values really hold the co-op together? And how have you guys leveraged that, if at all?
That's a key question. So
hold on, he's going to Google it.
Oh, yeah, Googling.
Is there a quote? We can get to quote wars.
I told y'all I didn't sleep last night. All right. So probably the most impressive, respected, one of the biggest co-ops in the world is called Mondragon. And it is in the Basque region of northern Spain. It's $1 billion corporation. They manufacture all kinds of different things. It's sort of like 50 different co-ops that are all kind of wedded together in a family. And it was built as this part of Spain was undergoing extreme kind of financial depression under the fascist period and various things. And the Basque region has something we can't just click our fingers and reproduce here, which is these folks have been living together for generations in valleys. They're deeply committed to one another. They already had cultural practices of community decision-making and a proto-democracy that goes way back. And those values were culturally embedded already, and they have been extremely successful at building cooperatives. Now, they're also very homogenous communities, right? They're all Basque folks. And here, we live in a pluralistic,
we're not all Americans.
Yeah, right. Some of y'all. And it turns out it's a lot harder to do democracy when we're different from one another.
Wow.
Obviously, right? And we all know the ways that, capital D democracy is suffering in this country. But one of the reasons for that is that there is very little practice of small d democracy in our daily lives. We don't actually have the muscles and the tools for that.
Yeah.
And so we think one of the most important ways of repairing that is exactly what you're talking about. How do we form relationships with one another and learn how to make decisions and work through things? That's why I say earlier, we've got to resist the things that are broken and doing injustice. We've got to build the new. We've also got to become the kind of people who are capable of it. And that's just reality, right? We've got to deepen into our own humanity and ability to be in relationship in order to do this kind of work. And there are also, thank goodness, some really good tools out there. People have thought a lot about how do you run organizations this way. My organization, ours, uses something called sociocracy that kind of came out of the Scandinavian countries, and it's used in all kinds of different workplaces and housing organizations and something like that. And it keeps everybody from having to be involved in every decision, but empowering people to make decisions who are closest to that work. And kind of you'll hear about things like, majority decisions, 51% makes the decision, right? That's what we're most familiar with. There's also consensus. Everybody's got to be on the same page. And that tends to be pretty tough because you got that one guy who's just like not going to let you have it. There's consensus -1. All right, as long as all of us except for Ron are willing to move forward on this, because we know
he's always that dude.
That's enough to get there. True. We actually practice something more called consent-based decision making, right? So let's look at all the options. Yeah. If this doesn't feel safe enough to try, if somebody is feeling like there's going to be some real consequence that we've got to rehash this, we're not going to move forward with it. But if everyone is willing to kind of go through some different rounds and say, this is safe enough to try a decision, let's experiment with it and see if it works, and then we can move towards policy and different things. So we practice something that's kind of like that. So there's tools out there. There's tons of them.
If I can repeat back what I think I've heard, is it's one thing to be like, oh, co-op model, cool, I want to be part of that.
Yeah.
You're internalizing the democracy, the small d democracy of it through what your
consensus
That's
model.
right.
Yes.
Oh, and I forgot to actually read the values. So people have actually agreed about this. So there's something called the International Cooperative Alliance. So this is global. Like I said, like a third of people in the world are part of co-op. So this is massive association, right? And they say, and we agree, this is in our bylaws as well, cooperatives are based on the values of self-help, self-responsibility, democracy, equality, equity, and solidarity. We got to think a lot about each of those words and what they mean in relationship with one another. But those are some of the things where, self-help and self-responsibility. Hey, what if we start our own cooperative? What if we can be a solution to this problem? What if, our co-op is owned by nonprofits, actually, whose problem is they're all spending money on the same things, but they're doing it in isolation. Together, they can be much more powerful, right? So literally, our board is represented by a group of nonprofits. And so here's nonprofits, not businesses, but they're concretely inside of the solidarity economy and owning a cooperative together in conjunction with, we also have worker owners. So that gets a little complex, right? But that's a way to step inside of that and say, we can take responsibility together in solidarity, practice democracy to get our decisions made. And we're going to orient ourselves towards equality and equity. What the outcomes of our work need to point in that direction, right? If they become predatory, extractive, we're not doing cooperatism correctly. Yeah. There's also some other values. There's kind of a US-based solidarity economy movement that has also done some really deep reflective work on other values like mutuality that come through as well. And, we actually have to cultivate those things in ourselves because day-to-day American life does not prioritize them and doesn't really teach us about how to be that way.
Yeah, I think I find that challenging just in terms of initiating process around ethos in our own office culture. It's a natural pushback because we operate in the fire drill mentality of like my plate's so full. Yeah. So and how do you in culture and ingrain actually we've got to shift the lens and really think about how the not so much the why is really critical. We all have to get on the same page of the why, but how we're doing the what is that shift is like I have to be doing the what all the time. Yeah. I have to be doing the what all the time. It's like how but can we shift the how we're doing it? And it's because
the world is on fire.
Yeah.
And there's a funder over here waiting for his report.
Yes.
His right. And we're caught in between those things. And so we are, and we're not exempt from that, right? But asking the question, like, what would it actually be like if we were all thriving?
Yeah.
What if this was an abundant system, not a scarcity system? What would it just imagine, I get that it's not like that today, but just imagine. Yeah. What would it be like if we were working in that kind of environment?
Yeah. Can we nerd out specifically on CPA a little bit?
Yeah.
Because for my nerdiness, the first 15 years of my career was in energy, and we run energy and fuel assistance programs here for clients in the community.
Thank you for that work.
In community action across Massachusetts and across the U.S., oversee fuel assistance or low-income heating assistance programs, but often complemented with weatherization, replacing heating systems. And in Massachusetts, we have extraordinary policy around climate action in Massachusetts, beginning with the Patrick administration, carried through the Baker administration, and now in the Haley administration, with huge amounts of resources into climate action. A lot of push towards grid modernization and electrification, which increases electricity costs. And we're moving towards things like air source heat pumps, right? So you're going to lower your fossil fuel bill or eliminate it, but your electricity bill is going to go up much higher in the balance of that. And then incentivizing solar and so on and so forth. And I know that's part of your, in the aggregate, energy and those types of pieces are really critical. There's also an element, and I think of Mary Wambui, who is on the Energy Efficiency Advisory Council and working for one of the departments. She's presented recently on the Grid Modernization Advisory Council to the utilities around equity, and they didn't start at the beginning, right? So, in the conversations has moved from we're going to incentivize, we're going to rebate, we're going to adoption through incentive, and there's been no real community level voice around what the impact is of not just the increase in electric costs and absorption and rate increases because of all the things that the utilities are in some ways being required to do through policy, but also the disruptive pieces of having to expand substations and rip up roads. And that often happens in communities that are disproportionately poorer because there isn't as much of that barrier happening. Does that, in the energy purchasing, I warned you this was nerdy, but does that come into effect at all from the purposes of, and the nonprofits, like a community action program? We also have energy programs, right? Where we're supplementing bills and in communities being very impacted by those rate increases, et cetera. Is there a component of that, or is it purely purchasing in terms of the community advocacy policy angle?
Yes and no. We're not a policy advocacy organization yet. We are part of some coalitions specifically around some racial justice issues that we're deeply a part of, as well as the cooperative movement. So we're a member of the Coalition for Worker Ownership and Power. We just had our lobby day a couple weeks ago, and we're asking to fund the Massachusetts Office for Employee Ownership that was authorized a couple years ago. They actually haven't given any money to yet. So we're doing advocacy on those fronts. And I think we are more on the side of what are the day-to-day real impacts of these changes, and how do we support organizations through these transitions and sort of shield them from the harshest effects. So, our simplest program in electricity, many people probably know, if you get your Eversource, your national grid bill, there's your supply portion, and there's the delivery portion of your bill. That's how it's broken down. There's all these kind of sub-items over that. So most of us are having the utility company, which are private corporations, do the supply as well as the delivery, right? They own the infrastructure and all of that. And you do have the option of looking out to third-party suppliers to negotiate a different rate than what the utility has. Something that I think is phenomenal and is a real way of practicing kind of using the public sector as a tool of democracy to get better things for the people. Massachusetts is one of only about 7 states, I believe, that allows for community choice electricity aggregations by the city itself.
Yes, Worcester's a participant,
which is phenomenal. So towns are doing that, and that's shielding particularly residential consumers from utilities have gone nuts over the last few years. When Russia attacked Ukraine, New England is more
64% it went up,
right?
Or that was the
We're dependent on liquid natural gas to produce a lot of our electricity still. I hope that all of these green changes like move us off of that increasingly. But right now, we're pretty dependent on it getting shipped over from Europe. So it went insane. We have the highest energy costs in the country. And so the utilities are now really up, like you said, 64%. So we're going to third-party suppliers who are kind of out there in the futures markets, and we're able to secure chunks of time. We can do a 1 year or a 2 year or a 3 year contract and lock in a fixed rate over that period of time. And those have outperformed even the city community choice aggregations. In large part, I think because when the city does it, they don't know exactly how many kilowatt hours are going to be consumed over that period of time. So the suppliers have to kind of do some rough math and build in some margin. We get the exact meter readings of from every organization. Yep. Exactly. So it's just able to be better tailored. And so we can get the best price. So that's at the first level, just how do you not experience these swings in price? And it's still rough compared to 3 years ago, but it's going to be better than what you're going to be dealing with out there, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of this, by coming together, we can have some more resiliency and shield ourselves from the vicissitudes of the market, right? And through our collective power, we can negotiate that. So that's the first level. In Washington, D.C., that's our parent co-op. We're the baby sister who is growing here, and we're in this network where we can work together. We haven't gotten into much of that. They have built out an enormous portion of the rooftop solar in Washington, D.C. Their incentives in D.C. are insane, way better than we have in Massachusetts. And so they were able to support a ton of, essentially what we do is we help our organizations figure out, are you eligible for solar? And then help them run. We run requests for proposals and bids. That's kind of our model at the base level, right? So we put out a request for bids to solar developers to say, who can get us the best deal here, and who's really going to structure this
solar
in more of a community. Well, sometimes it's community solar. That community solar tends. You may be more of an expert on this than I am, but community solar is usually where you're getting solar electricity that it's generated somewhere else.
You pull it part of the grid.
Yeah, so we're actually starting to do that in Massachusetts. There's some opportunities for smaller organizations who maybe can't build solar panels on their own roofs, but they could be in partnership with a larger solar farm or some big school that just built solar on their company that has excess production of solar electricity. So they're looking for others to be partnered in that. So we're trying to kind of network them together and help create savings for them on those fronts as well. The other thing we want to do in Massachusetts more and that they've done in DC is biggest consumption is HVAC systems like you just named. And so running those engineering studies to figure out what can we do? Can we move towards geothermal? Can we do some of these other projects? But those are huge capital intensive and very complex things. Yeah. And most of our nonprofits, they don't have expertise in that. It's very overwhelming. So that's one of our big hopes is that we can be a kind of guide through that process for more organizations.
Where community action might be able to be a good partner.
I think you guys should partner up. Yeah. So here's the thing. The way you this is terrible. I could talk forever. But we're at the end of our time for today. But I'm glad you got to share a little bit about where you guys are going and what you guys are focusing on. But I mean, we'd love to have you back for a part 2 if possible to continue this conversation. One of the things I think for me and for our listeners, definitely for me, opened my eyes on the power of cooperatives, the opportunity through cooperatives. And one of the things on the ripple effect we're talking about are innovative solutions to solve some of these complex problems. And so to continue to think about that and talk through that, sociocracy, like I'm already like Googling and stuff, just trying to think about that. No, seriously, even for my own organization where we are, as we're thinking about transitioning, didn't even get to talk to you about how spirituality plays into how all this kind of comes together and what makes you think about this work. And so we'd love to get into that more as well. So hopefully you guys will come back in the near future.
Maybe next time we can come back with a member owner.
Ooh, yeah, that would be great.
Yeah.
One more microphone.
No.
Yes,
no, you're fine.
Should we ask about a dad joke?
I don't know. Do you have one?
Any dad jokes?
You got
He's a dad of two. He has
from
them in
the
his
Community
back
Foundation,
pocket.
he just told me they asked me for a dad joke.
Oh,
I'm
you
like,
told me. He had a staff meeting about developing the. And his dad jokes were pretty.
I heard he had some in his back pocket.
Yes.
Look, my kids are 1 and 3.
Not there
That
yet.
stuff goes right over their head right now. Currently, I'm going. And
That's the dad joke
that
you got.
Kills in my house. It kills. Right. So give me a couple years. I'll work on my material.
Mom jokes? You got mom jokes?
I have no. Well, I do have a mom. This is sort of a mom joke. So growing up with a Black parent, my mom would always say, "I'm not one of your little friends from school." And so my son, one day I said that to him. He was mouthing off and I was like, "I'm not one of your little friends from school." And then we had another moment where he was like telling me something very intimate. And I was like, "You can tell me I'm your friend." And he's like, "But you told me I'm not one of your little friends from school."
Yes.
He was like,
Got
"Why are
the
you switching up?"
They
He was
clap
like,
back.
That very much sounds like
Yeah, be consistent, right? Like,
Yeah, that was my mom because I'm the mother. That was her because I'm the mother. Like, okay.
well, listen, thank you everybody for joining
thank
us
you for
on
coming
The
on.
Ripple Effect. Nathan, thank you for coming in.
Thank
Maria,
you.
always a
Yeah.
pleasure.
Thank you.
And everyone, please make sure you like, share, subscribe, tap into some of these things, and we'll catch you next time on The
check
Ripple
out
Effect.
CPA.
Yeah, check out CPA. You guys' website and everything.
CPA.coop. COOP.
There you go.
We've got co-op in the Commonwealth.substack is our newsletter if
Okay.
you want to get in on all the good stuff.
Yeah,
Nice.
definitely.
Nice.
All right, we'll get that out there.
All right, let's get it out
Thank you.
there. All right, thank you.
You're listening to The Ripple Effect, a nonprofit imperative with Ron Waddell and Marybeth Campbell. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share. We'll see you on the next one.